You're listening to an IOE podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
This is Research for the Real World. Conversations with researchers about the paths they've taken to shape our everyday lives.
This is Research for the Real World. Hello, I'm Dr. Jo Nicol, Lecturer in Science Education at IOE, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. In this season of Research for the Real World, we're talking about the theme of language, culture, and the arts in education, and the impact research can have on everyday lives. Today, I'm delighted to have Professor Juhua in the studio. Juhua is a professor of language learning and intercultural communication and director of IOE's International Centre for Intercultural Studies, ICIS for short. She is a former chair of the British Association for Applied Linguistics. And prior to this, Juhua worked at the University of Birmingham and Birkbeck College at the University of London. Her research interests and expertise span across multilingualism and intercultural communication and child language. I am very excited to hear your insights and discuss your fascinating work with you today. So welcome to the podcast, Juhua.
Well, thank you very much, Jo, for having me. Thank you.
You are very welcome. I'm going to begin with a more broader question, if that's okay. And just to start us off with, could you share with us a little bit about your journey and what led you to focus your research on languages and intercultural communication?
My intellectual research question has always been about similarities and differences between people of different backgrounds and children of different learning abilities. And that's actually where I found language and culture are two very important factors or lenses, if you like, to look at these differences and similarities. So what really got into me into the research, into the multilingualism, into cultural communication, are my early exposure to course. I think nowadays the course is called intercultural pragmatics. In my old days, it was called cross-cultural pragmatics, where people talk about the differences in the way we work with languages, particularly the way we use the languages for. Just to give you an example, for example, in English, when you say hello, that's regarded as a function of greeting. And there are other ways of greetings as well. In addition, you can say, how are you, how do you do, which is much more formal. But when I actually studied this in the cross-cultural pragmatics, what we were told that people from different cultures use languages in a different ways. In Chinese culture, where I was educated, I understand the greeting was done other different expressions. For example, have you eaten? That's actually surprised perhaps many speakers who don't really speak Chinese why people are interested in whether I had lunch or breakfast or dinner. But that's one cultural ways of speaking, say hello to each other. The other bit related to this, I was always puzzled working in UK, is some people who actually don't really know me, and they would actually approach me with a greeting, which they believe was a Chinese ways of greeting with ni hao. The translation equivalent is hello, but as I explained earlier, the Chinese way of greeting is not necessarily to do with ni hao, but very much actually functional, contextualized in what we do. Have you eaten? Could be how are you? How are things? Could be actually our Chinese equivalent of saying hello, but less so with ni hao in Chinese context. So this got me into the differences and similarities, to what extent these differences exist and to what extent similarities exist across people of different cultural linguistic background.
I think that's fascinating. I love that idea of being able to go up to someone and say, "Have you eaten?" And it's a really nice story to sort of show, that initial excitement or something that's really excited you about your research. Tell us, so that's obviously where it began, this interest in language and culture and the similarities and differences between them. How did that lead on to the research you're doing now and where you're based now?
I'm a director of an international center called International Center of Intercultural Studies. This is a both old and new center. Old in the sense was founded a while ago, back in 1979, by a late Professor Jagdish Gundara. At that time, the center's name is Center for Multicultural Education. So you can see how things have changed. It was actually called multicultural. Nowadays, it's very much people talking about interaction. So the founder, who unfortunately passed away in 2016, who was UNESCO chair for intercultural education and teacher education specifically. So Professor Gundara had this vision in schools in UK. We need to talk about multicultural education in order to encourage children to embrace diversity from young age. It's very much a focus on education and study of diversity, equity, and social justice. So I was appointed 2 years ago in 2022 to head up the center. And we put in a proposal, and then the revived center was approved by the Institute of Education Research Board. So we have a newly revived center. The focus is also want to build on the strengths of the formal center, but also broaden up from the education in school to society and individual's life. So the focus of the current center is understanding the role of culture in education and society. We're really interested in promoting intellectually rigorous and practically relevant and also interdisciplinary intercultural studies. And that help us to understand the role of culture in society, education, and communication.
Fantastic. How exciting. What an exciting role for you to be playing. Well, in terms of this idea of how we've moved on and the way we're talking about intercultural studies now and communication, I wonder, for our listeners who might not be familiar with that field, what are some of the most pressing challenges in language and learning language today, especially when it comes to that intercultural communication?
Thank you, Joe. That's a very good question. And I think in terms of pressing issues, I will start with the conceptual development. I think that's actually engaging with latest conceptualization about what is culture, what is language, what is communication, for me, are crucial in applying these research going forward. So in terms of conceptualization, I know we only have very short space time, but really want to send it out. Three big sort of conceptual innovation, I should say, regarding these keywords. First of all, language. In the past, language is very much treated as a set of codes. So this is the means of communication. But within the applied linguistic research, language is very much regarded as an action, a verb. So we are talking about languaging rather than language. So what do I mean by languaging? The languaging is very much a collaborative activity. So when we're talking, as we are talking now, it is a collaborative activity that involves language to create meaning, solve problems, and build knowledge. So as you see, language is no longer just a tool we use, but very much actually a way, as a cognitive process that involves negotiating, producing meaning, output. So this is very much sort of the latest debate within the applied linguist studies. And building on that, people are talking about translanguaging. So translanguaging is really about how people like us using all available linguistic and semiotic resources to facilitate understanding and communication so that we can promote a fluid and dynamic approach to communication. Right. So when we're talking, we're not just actually relying on the codes that embedded in words, but also looking at each other and making sense of how, where you are looking at, your eye gaze, your body, and also other things that's actually near, while happening while we are speaking, making sense these semiotic resources to communicate. So here we have a huge paradigm shift, if you like, from talking about language as a discrete code to languaging and translanguaging. The trans is a very powerful word. It actually indicates we are crossing and going beyond the different modes between the different languages and different modality. And that's actually one crucial difference in terms of applied linguistic research can tell us about the conceptual change about language. The second one, if I may go on, is about the culture. Now, the notion of culture is very complex, and I think back in 1930s, when I look into the sort of the early study on intercultural communication, always start with how do we define culture? The notion of culture is expanding. It's partly to do with globalization and partly to do with more super diverse way of living we are experiencing these days. So within the broad field of intercultural communication, we have seen the prefix inter, I mentioned earlier before, these prefix gradually taking precedence over cross or multi. When people stop talking about cross-cultural, because that's actually very much actually invented during the sort of post-war, Second War period when people were less likely to travel. And then people also talking about intercultural a lot more than multicultural. Multi often applies different culture coexist alongside each other. There's very, very little interaction. That's when multicultural comes in. But inter here has an edge over multi as way we're encouraging interaction, dialogue between people of different cultural, linguistic, ethnic background. So as you see, the notion of culture is expanding. It's no longer just about culture live together, but more about mingling interaction between different cultural groups. So that's actually, I would say, the first sort of conceptual challenge that's actually encouraged, that's actually really need to be embedded, and how we respond to these conceptual challenges in application. How do we use it to understand the role of culture in society, education, and individuals' life?
Fantastic. Yeah, I know a little bit about translanguaging. We've been doing some work on that within science education and looking at the nature of the English language in relation to that. But I find it fascinating, that this notion of culture is expanding and changing. In terms of the challenges for people in language learning today, what do you think those are so they're the conceptual challenges. What are the most pressing challenges, more the practical challenges, I guess?
Thank you, Joe. I think that's the first thing. I think it's actually the impact, because these conceptual changes, the first implication it has is actually why do we learn language? So what's the goal of language learning? What do we learn? For example, French, German, Spanish, or Chinese, particularly with AI coming in, there are lots of rumors, discussion. And in fact, we have seen in some part of the world, because of AI, the number of students studying languages sadly decreased in the last couple of years. But all these, I think, is going back to the question, what do we people learn the languages for? In fact, because of the AI technology, the impact, I would say because of this, there is actually really important time for us to think about the goal of language learning. There has been lots of serious discussion about people learn the languages, how culture come in. To start with, I would say language and culture are closely interrelated. You cannot talk about language without actually touching on culture. Everything is culturally coded and embedded, right? So that's actually where we start from. So in terms of a pedagogy, various approaches we have actually had in teaching language and how culture come in. We have a pedagogy that's actually teaching culture through literature, and that's actually one very common way, I would say classical way of embedding culture in language learning. And we have colleagues in the IOE have done fantastic work looking at how we teach cultural language learning through literature, art, creative arts. The second is actually teaching culture as products or practices. For example, the example I mentioned earlier, how do we, gift offering and gift giving and offering, how do we say hello? They are very different cross culturally. So learning these differences will help us understand why a particular ways of speaking is different cross culturally, and help us to broaden our horizons and then expose to different ways of doing things. The third pedagogy, which I think the current one, is the intercultural approach to language learning. So what do we mean by that? It's actually intercultural approach is very much focusing on the role of individual, the learners and teachers. So by that, by being an intercultural mediator, for example, if you think learning a language is enable you to become mediators between different cultures, and our role of learner will actually change from just actually passive receiver of knowledge, but become embedded in skills learning, and particularly the skills in translating culture. When you actually translating culture here, translation is not just about the translating a meaning from one set of code to another, but more broadly speaking, looking at the role of a way of thinking about how language, people, cultures transformed as they move between different languages, different places. So the new way of thinking about intercultural approach to language and cultural learning is seeing learners as a translator, as a translating culture, particularly from that perspective. So this is coming out from a research we carried out through AHSC funded project on translating culture. There was a very large theme on translating culture, and my project funded together with colleagues based in Birmingham and Cardiff and then Birkbeck as I was at that time, and also colleague based in LE. We look at how meaning and sense making was actually made through languages, particularly through translanguaging and translating culture. So this is actually new approach to language and learning, and I hope that will help us to see particularly in the era where people talking about AI on the daily basis, the role of individuals we can play in learning language, and then how it help us to broaden horizon and to actually get to know others through the role of translating culture.
Wow, yeah. I mean, and how empowering for people if they can speak these different languages and like you say, be the mediator between different cultures. To me, it sounds very motivating to want to learn and love a language, even for no other reason other than being able to be that mediator. It's exciting. You've got some work at the moment at the IOE that is leading to some real world impact, especially with initiatives like the National Consortium for Languages Education, the NCLE. And I wondered if you could explain how this program's helping to improve language learning in schools across England.
Oh, thank you, Jo. will, and that's really important piece of work. I'm currently engaged. So NCLE stands for National Consortium for Languages Education. It's a project funded by Department for Education, led by ILE, Faculty of Education Society, and in partnership with British Council and also in partnership with Gold Institute. So as you see, the name has two keywords. One is a consortium, so it's a partnership involving with key stakeholders. Here we are working with the schools in England, and the other keywords is a plural form of language. So it's not just about one particular language, but really emphasizing multi-plural languages education. The project is funded by DFE, and the overarching aim of this project is to re-energizing language learning in state-maintained primary and secondary school in England. This is very much a response to the decline we have seen in recent years, that the number of students studying languages in secondary school is decreasing over the time. So this is a project very much hope to, through developing teachers' capacity, and then in order to work with school to encouraging more children to take up languages and then to achieve better result in GCSE. So the languages, as many people here would know, we have lots of challenges in England, in particular learning languages. Now, through this project, we would like to provide high quality language teaching in schools, increasing language uptakes at the GCSE. So this NCLE mission is to leverage the value of all our languages by providing high quality language teaching in schools, increasing languages uptake at the GCSE, and increasing opportunities for disadvantaged pupils, addressing the performance of boys. And we know in languages, particular, that there are more girls are taking interest in languages than boys, and also better recognizing and supporting the rich diversity of languages. We are talking about home, heritage, and community languages currently offered in schools in England. So this is actually the overarching mission of the NCLE. My role in the NCLE is the Director of Research Innovation, so leading on the research, and then having worked on the various projects before funded by stakeholders before, and I have never had such dynamic and real feel of working with the schools in this way. So before we start, there was a challenges of how, we know school teachers are busy. So how can we encourage school teachers to spend time, interviewing, talking to us, and letting us into the school visit? And that's actually huge challenge for us. So we have actually thought about how can we offer something that actually can be directly relevant to the practices. So we have looked around and then decided to pick two angles. One is a priority setting approach. So this is the approach that we ask teachers what research topics, questions, and issues they would like to address through the research. And then we did that in a conference, asking teachers to tell us what research topics, problems they would want to resolve. Second, we have refined our research into a collaborative research approach where we are very much hope the insight we have gathered rigorous research can feed back directly into the practice of language professionals and policy. So what we have been doing is in very much actually in three areas. One is actually providing the data. This is actually very time consuming but worthwhile. We have a look at the data in terms of where things are in each school. The second area is tracking the impact of NCLE. Right. So the NCLE we started 2023, and this is 1.5 years into that research, into the cycle. So we need to track in which area, what we have done, what impact we have, and what changes has actually already reflected in the practices. The third area is really looking at how can we sustain the impact of NCLE, and this is the area I'm very happy to talk a bit more if we have time. It's about leadership for language education. How can we systematize what we have done successfully through NCLE and learning from our schools and our teachers, their success stories, and then in order to gain insight and then systematize lessons learned and then share the good practices with other schools which are not involved in the hubs, and then to learn and then to inform policymakers' decision. So that's the three areas we have been busy with.
You've been very busy indeed. You mentioned impact there, and I wondered if I know that it's only been going for a year now, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If it started in 2023, but what kind of differences do you think this is making to students? And you mentioned also looking at pupil premiums, looking at disadvantaged children, so those that are in state schools especially. What difference do you think?
I think it's still early days, but we are looking into and understanding various factors, for example, in why people take up languages, and also particularly at the school level, what factors that actually impact on the language GCSE uptake, including school policies, how people position themselves, and whether school policies, the impact school policies have impact of who choose languages and then in what format, and then also learner profiles. It's early days, but we have some sort of a finding that tell us school policies, language policies, have a huge impact on the number of the students taking up the languages, and also the society's wider perceptions of why people learn language for also has a huge impact on the number of students uptakes we have.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And it reminds me a little bit of some research that also has been done here with Professor Louise Archer and her team, and the idea of school policies really impacting on how the nature of whether students teach or choose, triple science or double science, and that has big implications for these students' lives if they're not going to take a language, for instance. It's important work in that sense. And I think the NCLE also highlights the importance of supporting heritage languages spoken by communities in the UK. Why is it so important to promote a wide range of languages, do you think? And how does this benefit society as a whole? Because you mentioned there as well this idea of the importance of looking at society as a whole as well.
There are 300 languages spoken in UK these days, but only a few languages are formally taught in school. So here clearly there is a disparity there. So by recognizing and giving heritage home community language children a chance to take these language exams in schools we are sending a strong signal. All languages matter. And so the huge multilingual resources we have in society, in schools, we need to draw on. And then also, this is very much actually a social justice issue. By ratifying the language resources these children have and their family have are a way of accepting their social, cultural, linguistic capitals and turning these capitals into multiculturalism for the society. So that's actually one huge issue. That's one practice that actually has huge benefits for the society and education. and also the families of the children speaking languages other than English.
Indeed. So a benefit to the student as well as society. Thank you so much. Can you share any more exciting future projects that you're working on that will further support language learning and intercultural understanding?
Yes, I think clearly there is lots of more work need to be done in how can we actually provide equitable opportunities for all languages, for all children speaking variety of languages. And I think we only started looking at school policy impact, but potentially it will be also very interesting to look at the opportunities of other languages. For example, I know we have a very successful MEP program offering Mandarin teaching in schools, and that's we need to learn why they are so successful in K and what lessons we can actually gain from there, and also whether there's a possibilities of offering other languages as part of the school curriculum. I know has been some changes recently in particularly in offering GCSE sign languages. And I think that's great opportunity to look at these different languages and see making accessible to all children in school.
Thank you so much, Juhua. I'm completely convinced, and I hope that there is a wealth of uptake in languages across the UK. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's inspiring to see how your work's shaping the future of language learning in schools, helping to build a stronger intercultural connections, and I think just generally bringing people together in a society that feels sometimes a bit full of division is really, really good to hear. So thank you very much. I'm sure our listeners will be eager to follow the progress of your exciting projects. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You've just heard from Professor Juhua. Some of what we've covered today is also available in the episode notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, we have an archive of 23 past seasons. Search IOE Podcast to find episodes of Research for the Real World, as well as more podcasts from IOE. Oh, and a quick favour before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, we'd really appreciate it if you could give the IOE Podcast a rating. 5 stars would be nice if you're enjoying the show. And that will help us to reach more people who are interested in hearing about such important work. I'm Jo. Thanks for listening.
Research for the Real World is produced by IOE Marketing and Communications and IOE Research Development. The theme music was created by Rob Cochran. Tatiana Sotero Diaz is the series advisor, Amy Leibowitz is the series producer, and Jason Ilagan is the executive producer of the IOE podcast.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast.